The world's first selfie, often thought to be false, is now proving that it's actually very possibly true. Today, we're going to take a look at the Shroud of Turin.
63 different academic disciplines cannot explain how there is an image in the Shroud of Turin. They cannot explain it.
All these scientists have no idea how they faked it. It's got to be real.
Have you ever done a deep dive here? I've never done a deep dive into this, but it's getting a lot of attention right now because of new studies that have been done on it. Did you know that this 14-foot, 3-inch burial shroud bearing the imprint of a naked man is the most studied artifact in history? In fact, over 500,000 interdisciplinary hours have been spent studying and trying to replicate the shroud.
That's modern scientists. And Glenn, I want to be clear when I say this, 500,000 interdisciplinary hours have been spent studying this object by 63 different academic disciplines. 63. I have one academic discipline as a historian, as a first century scholar. 63 different academic disciplines cannot explain how there is an image in the Shroud of Turin. They cannot explain it.
But the world's first selfie, often thought to be false, is now proving that it's very possibly true. Why? Why has this been studied so much across so many disciplines? Well, there are two big reasons. First, the selfie on the cloth isn't just anyone. It is largely believed to be the image of Jesus of Nazareth. This is thought to be his burial shroud. And unlike the Conningly fairies, this claim gets stronger and stronger. Secondly, how did the full body image become imprinted into the linen cloth? This is the bigger mystery. Anyway, I just wanted to shed light on how incredible our world is. Between this and the new findings under the ancient pyramids at Giza, we have a lot to marvel at right now, which is entirely good for our hormones and the cells of our body. This is the sole purpose of this episode. Being in a place of gratitude, wonder, and awe is one of the healthiest ways to live. Okay, so this imprint is indeed human blood. Curious to know what blood type Jesus probably was? I'll tell you in a bit. This artifact, the Shroud of Turin, is long believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth. Well, actually, let me take that back. In the 1st century, the shroud was presented to King Abgar V of Edessa, which is now part of southeastern Turkey. As Abgar's descendants became increasingly pagan, violence was breaking out against Christians, someone hid the shrouds in the city walls, where it remained for centuries until it was rediscovered and sent to Constantinople as a holy relic. It lived there until 1204, when members of the Fourth Crusade got their grimy little hands on it. Some say it was the Knights of the Templar who hid the shroud in France. Whoever hid it kept it safe for nearly 150 years, until 1353. Discovered yet again, the shroud is taken to Lille, France, and put on display as the actual burial cloth of Jesus. All was well for about 40 years, until the bishop of the area claimed to have found a letter written by the previous bishop. And in that letter, he said he heard the confession of an artist who claimed to have made the shroud. And so the church kept the shroud, kept it on display, but added a disclaimer that this was indeed a fake. And so it was believed to be a fake. Eventually, the granddaughter of that bishop, much to everybody's surprise and outrage, took the shroud and gave it to Louis, the Duke of Savoy. It stayed with his family in France until 1578, when the family moved to Turin, Italy, where it remains to this day. I might also add that in 1506, the Pope, and therefore officially the Catholic Church, declared that the shroud is indeed valid as the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. In 1898, a professional photographer was hired to take pictures of the shroud. What he discovered in the darkroom that evening rocked the Jesus-loving world.
It turns out, like if you look at it with the naked eye, it's white, and then you see the image of the face is kind of like yellow. You can barely see it. But in like 1898, some photographer took a picture of it and then flipped and then looked at the negative, and then all of a sudden in the negative, the whole body appears, front and back.
Though it's not visible with the naked eye, the photo negatives of the shroud reveal the detailed imprint of the entire body and face of this crucified man. So it's only in the negative that you really see the image of Christ. And what a surprise to find the entire body, not just the face as they had thought. In 1983, the Shroud of Turin was bequeathed to the Vatican, although it stayed in Turin. And in 1988, radiocarbon dating was performed from a corner piece of the linen shroud. And it was determined that the shroud was dated between the years 1260 and 1390. Radiocarbon dating is very reliable, so the results have gone unquestioned. So the shroud has been thought to be a fake, that is, until recently. Last year, 2 shroud enthusiasts noticed that in the area that the sample for radiocarbon dating was taken, there is a variation in the threads of the weave of the fabric. You see, the original shroud was pure linen and in a herringbone weave, but the shroud has been around for much longer than each of us, and it has changed hands and locations and situations since then. It's even survived 3 fires. In the medieval period, the shroud was repaired in a few places, and cotton was used instead of linen. The nuns did a fantastic job, and the repairs went undetected for centuries.
In the mid-1500s, the shroud survives a fire in Chambéry, France. And there, the nuns not only sewed in these triangles, say all the triangles for the benefit of our audience as well. The fire almost took the shroud. It was folded in a box. And so those horizontal black lines, those are scorch marks, okay? The 16 triangles are patches. But we also, the evidence tells us that the nuns also patched the fraying edges of this 0.3 millimeter thick fine linen shroud. And they did a technique. And again, anyone can read this, okay? All you have to do, we learn from everyone, but don't ever let anyone think for you. You can see that there is cotton that is invisibly woven into the patchwork of the fibers of the linen shroud. So let me be clear. The data, it was a problem of sampling. It was a problem of the sample that was taken. They took literally a patch sample, and then the headline was, this is a medieval forgery. It's from 1260 to 13.
It wasn't until the enthusiasts with their hawk-like eyes noticed the difference in the threads and the weave and realized that the portion that was taken for sampling was a portion that had been repaired. In any case, new testing has been done. Let's hear what Joe Rogan and Eddie Bravo have to say about it.
Shroud of Turin.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was fake. Like in the 80s.
What is that?
The shroud, it's like the cloth that Jesus was buried in and left an image of him. And in the 80s, like 1988, they did carbon dating on it. And they go, oh, it's fake.
It has the image of Jesus burned into it somehow or another.
I never looked into it. I just figured it was fake. But listening to you and Mel Gibson talk about it, I'm like,
it's real?
Is there?
Well, apparently it's a lot older than they assumed when they did the first testing. And one of the problems is that there's cross-contamination. There's also been repairs to it. But they did subsequent testing and they found that it was like 2,000 plus years old.
Yeah, and the one thing, it's the most studied artifact ever.
Damn.
Like particle physicists, nuclear engineers, they all studied it, and some of them, some believe in it, some don't believe in it, but they all agree on one thing: no one knows how they did it.
Right. No one knows how they made it.
There's no paint. There's no dye.
It wasn't paint and it wasn't dye and
they all agree on that.
Wasn't burned.
They all agree it's a mystery but then the skeptics say just because we don't know how it was done doesn't make it real, which is a good point. But then the other side's like, dude, all these scientists have no idea how they faked it. It's got to be real. So it's all about how you look at it. It's insane because it's a negative image on a non-photographic material. It's linen.
Right.
And then it turns out, like if you look at it with the naked eye, it's white. And then you see the image of the face is kind of like yellow. You can barely see it. But in like 1898, some photographer took a picture of it and then flipped and then looked at the negative. And then all of a sudden in the negative, the whole body appears, front and back. Because he was buried like with
You see the images, Jerry?
He was buried with the sheet under him and it went around his head. That's the back of him because the
right one's the back and the left one's the front. That's crazy.
No one knows how they did it.
And it
No-
even has,
no
like, the
scientist.
holes where the wrist would be nailed.
Real.
But even if this is real, Eddie, it doesn't mean he was resurrected, right? It just means he was crucified and he was the actual real man.
No, the thing is how the image got on.
It's not like it's paint or dye, and they've tried to replicate it many times. Nobody can. There is an incredible explanation out there that we'll explore in a moment. But before we do, let's talk about how interesting it is that the blood corresponds to the wounds that Jesus had, like completely corresponds to the wounds. In fact, every single part of this body matches the exact depiction of Jesus and his wounds per the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament. This is Dr. John Campbell discussing the wounds.
From the image on the shroud, we see that the man of the shroud has a broken nose, a swollen face. Part of the beard has been plucked out, tearing wounds produced by the scourging, wounds from the crown of thorns, bruises on the shoulder, which we believe, if this is indeed Jesus of Nazareth, from carrying the weight of a cross. Again, it's consistent. Knee injuries from repeated falls, nail wounds from Roman crucifixion, and an oval wound between the 5th and the 6th rib on the right-hand side. And again, these are the wounds that have been known about from the sufferings of Christ himself.
We had an ultraviolet light right now. There'd be a lot of fun, Glenn, because I could show you that the shroud, the number one substance on the shroud is blood. There are pints and pints and pints of blood all over the shroud. There's blood. There's 50 abrasions. We'll get to the crown of thorns on the forehead. 372 lacerations from a Roman whip called a flagrum, the flagellation of Jesus in the blood. Now, the interesting thing is when we were walking through it, the lance wound in the side is right there in the Shroud of Turin. We'll talk about this in the way that Jesus died in excruciating fashion. When they look at that blood they tested, and that is post-mortem blood. He was already dead. That blood is tested differently than the blood on the rest of the shroud. And that is consistent. Pilate is shocked based on the historical record that Jesus had died so quickly. Jesus dies in 6 hours, which shows you the particular brutality that he went through in the scourging and also beating in the house of Caiaphas, etc. And yet we know based on the blood samples that this is post-mortem blood. So again,
Let me know what you think. So they've done a lot of testing on the Shroud of Turin, and they just don't know how that full body imprint got there. And it's on both sides equally. Knowing that everything is made of energy, and I don't know, it's linen. It's a non-photographic material. So how does it appear on the linen? Let's hear again from Dr. John Campbell.
No one's been able to duplicate the way that this image is generated, even now in 2024. There are no chemical or physical methods known which can account for the totality of the image, nor can any combination of physical, chemical, biological, or medical circumstances explain the image adequately. And that remains true today. This image is a total enigma. It appears to be produced by a very short flash of high intensity light radiation. Or if there's another way it was produced, it still hasn't been elucidated and can't be
as he is resurrected. It's just like a flash of light, of
Correct.
energy,
correct.
that just imprints on this.
Yes.
Is there another explanation for this?
Again, another scientist, another school is given 5 years to study this. Just the amount of electromagnetic energy or even radiation it would take to produce an image on a shroud like this. But the fascinating thing is the timing, because when they sample it, it takes a lot of time to get the image on the shroud, but then the shroud would burn up almost instantaneously. So we know the image of the shroud based on 5 years of study on light. And again, you can read all this. It's fascinating. We know that it happened in 1/40th of a billionth of a second.
Oh my gosh.
1/40th billionth of a second. And it took 34,000 trillion watts of energy emanating from the body in a flash of 1/40th of a billionth of a second to produce that image. So in other words, God took the first selfie.
Wow. And at that, it left an imprint.
That is the moment
it would have been
of Jesus' physical bodily resurrection, Sunday morning, April 5th, AD 33. It's at that moment. And then it's the fall through theory that the sheet, essentially the body flashes alive and the sheet falls through.
So that's crazy, right? There are a few really great podcasts that dive even deeper into this that I highly recommend. Link them down below in the description. And as for that blood type, you ready? Drum roll, please. Possibly Jesus was blood type
AB. Less than 3% of the world's population has type AB blood, and it is found primarily in the land of Israel.
Okay, so that's wild. As for me, I find that fascinating. Let me know what you think. Be sure to give a like and subscribe. You guys make